Next, we have existing stablecoin models on a spectrum of decentralization and self-sufficiency. Dmitri Senchenko, founder of Feron stablecoin, ex-Goldman Sachs Financial Institutions Group. Please welcome Dmitri.
Hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here. Now, hold on. One second. Now, before we get into stablecoins, let me just talk a little bit about what makes for good money. Now, the classical answer to that question is that money needs to satisfy three key criteria. It needs to perform as a medium of exchange, as a store of value, and as a unit of account. So, how do existing cryptocurrencies measure up to that? In terms of medium of exchange, we're basically talking about the ability to transact. And existing protocols deliver that functionality, albeit imperfectly. Basically, the issue here is scalability. But the good news is that the next generation of cryptocurrencies is promising to solve that problem. The situation is quite similar with respect to store of value. Again, we already can securely store and retrieve our cryptocurrencies, and certain practical improvements are on the way. However, now we come to the question of the unit of account. It is linked directly to price stability, and here, arguably, cryptocurrencies are at their worst. We are entering the domain of monetary policy, and by definition, every cryptocurrency has one. The problem is that these policies are very basic, and they obviously are failing at what they should be doing. So this is where stablecoins come in. Now, what is the function of stablecoins and why are they a big deal? Now, their first and primary use is as a transaction currency. Now, given price stability, a vendor no longer has to change their price tags twice a day. Or more generally, parties can enter into a long-term contractual relationship without the fear that at any point in time, due to a swing in the reference price of their contract, value will be redistributed among them, and a contract that was profitable before will become unprofitable in a matter of weeks, if not overnight. Now, moving on from the question of commercial transactions, stablecoins will also form a basis for the future decentralized financial industry. Again, we're talking about a stable reference currency. Starting from the concept from other contexts of a lending contract and all the way to a complex financial derivative. What we don't want is to contend with a huge chunk of risk, which at any point in time can swing value from one counterparty to another. Generally speaking, what we're trying to do is create a stable monetary base for the whole of the crypto economy. Now, the fiat equivalent of that role actually stands at $40 trillion globally. Now, obviously, I'm not saying cryptocurrency or stablecoin valuations will approach that number at any point in time, but whichever way you look at it, the opportunity is huge. So, how do stablecoins work? There are three general categories of models. First, we have mechanisms that rely on fiat collateral. Now, how does that work? Basically, you take a bunch of fiat currency, you place it in escrow with a conventional financial institution. Then what you do is you issue stablecoins in the same amount, and at the same time, you institute a policy which says that anyone holding that stablecoin can go and claim a portion of that collateral at a fixed exchange rate. Now, here stability is basically based on the opportunity for direct arbitrage. This is absolutely the simplest way to deliver stability, but on the flip side, you're completely dependent on the institution that holds your collateral. Next, we have models that use crypto collateral. Now, on the surface, they look similar to the first model I just described. Basically, again, as I said, they use collateral and they do rely on arbitrage in order to achieve stability. But there's a key difference. Now, the asset that you're using as collateral is not the same asset that is your reference point for stability. Instead, what you have is one or several crypto assets which are in themselves volatile. Now, what that means for the mechanism is that in order for your monetary policy to function, you need to know how much your collateral is worth at any point in time. And this is where price feeds come in. Now, there are two types of price feeds. One is Oracle-based, which is simply a centralized mechanism which takes information from a trusted source and delivers it into your blockchain. Now, the advantage of it is that the information will likely be accurate. On the flip side, if that centralized mechanism is compromised, stabilization is over. Your other option is a decentralized price feed, which basically takes a bunch of people and then economically incentivizes them to tell the truth about what they perceive the price level to be at various points in time. Now, superficially, it sounds like a simple thing to do. In reality, it is a hugely complicated game theoretic problem. And personally, I'm not aware of a fully fledged implemented solution. Now, finally, we move into the domain of Schelling point mechanisms. Schelling points, also known as focal points, are a very interesting idea. Now, to give you an example, say you put two people into separate rooms and give them both an identical sheet of paper on which you have a simple drawing of two lines intersecting, basically a cross. And then you give these people a task of guessing, or rather choosing, without communicating with each other, the same point on that sheet of paper. Now, the theory goes that most of the time, people will choose the point where lines intersect, because that is the uniquely identifiable point on that sheet of paper. Now, Schelling point models basically revolve around the idea that you can have price stability as the focal point of the system. Now, how does that work? Firstly, let me give you a tiny piece of theory, which says that a change in price of your coin can be neutralized by a corresponding proportional change in coin supply. So in simple terms, say your price falls by 10%, and if you then shrink your money supply again by 10%, coin price will eventually revert to the original level. Now, there are a number of ways to implement this mechanism. Probably the simplest one would be to have a dual coin system where you have a stable coin and a volatile coin. And then you pair them with some sort of a smart contract which receives price information from a price feed and then offers users to exchange stable coin for volatile coin or the other way around in appropriate amounts, and thus it can either shrink or expand money supply. Now, the critical thing here is that users will only engage in those trades if they believe that everybody else is going to do so. And that is the only way the system will work. And perhaps intuitively you can see how we're getting to the point where stability is becoming that very focal point I mentioned before. So everybody needs to believe in it, and that's the only way the system will perform. Now, it's a hugely, hugely elegant solution in my view. However, the problem here is that, again, it's extremely difficult to implement, and you have the problem that if a chunk of your users, for any reason whatsoever, cease to believe in the system and start misbehaving, again, stabilization is over. Now, let's look at these models on the scale of decentralization and self-sufficiency. First of all, we all know why decentralization is a desirable trait. Self-sufficiency, on the other hand, is also hugely important for stablecoins. What do we mean by that? First of all, it's a question of using assets that you do not generate and thus do not control. These assets can either misbehave or they can fail. Also, it's a question of using price information from outside of your system. And again, that information can be compromised, and even if it is not, you are fundamentally playing second fiddle to some external asset, which has its own volatility parameters and a set of its own problems, whatever they may be. So let's have a look at the chart into the bottom left corner. There we have mechanisms with fiat collateral. And here, the question is very simple. You are effectively hostage to the institution that holds your money, so there's no self-sufficiency or decentralization to speak of. Then we move into the center where we have 4 models. Each of these models has 2 components. One is a price feed, and the other is an element which actually delivers stability. Now, price feeds are, by definition, not self-sufficient because you're dealing with external information. But, as you remember, they can either be decentralized or centralized. Now, oracles are your centralized solution, and your Krauss-based feeds are decentralized. Then, reverting to the elements that actually provide stability, we have crypto collateral, which, if selected appropriately, can be decentralized, but it will never rather be self-sufficient because, again, you're dealing with external essence. And finally, you have shelling point solutions, which are both decentralized and self-sufficient, since all of the assets that these models employ are internally generated. Now this brings us to the Feron stabilization protocol on which we work. Actually, this is the first time we speak about it in a public forum. It is a model that, as far as we know, does not have a counterpoint in economic theory or practice. It involves a single internally generated asset, and it does not rely in any way on price signals. So how does that work? Let's first look at demand for money. It can be split into 2 portions. One is speculative and the other is transactional. Now, transactional demand is basically coins you use every day, and we are not particularly concerned with them in this context. Now, speculative demand for money is what drives price volatility. It is coins that people use or hold in order to make a profit. Now, as things currently stand, these speculative coins are usually distributed across a huge number of consumer wallets, or they are held with crypto exchanges. Now, what we do is we introduce into that system a central bank, which offers users a range of deposits with various maturities. Now, these deposits always pay a positive and critically riskless interest rate. Now, what does that mean? If you are holding speculative coins and you are not at this point in time trying to actively sell them, then there's absolutely no reason for you not to place them on deposit and earn a riskless rate of return. Now, on a systemic level, what that means is that the central bank effectively hovers up the excess speculative liquidity from the system and places it into a single structure. Now imagine there is a negative price event. So people basically want to sell their coin because they expect price to fall. Now, what's going to happen? Before, you could just go and sell your coin, but now, first, you have to pull your deposit from the central bank. So essentially, the central bank is receiving a signal which says that a certain person is willing to forego a riskless rate of return in order to receive their coin and do something else with it. Now, when those signals become numerous on a systemic level, it almost invariably means that the price expectation for the coin is falling. Now, what does the central bank do? It does a very simple thing. It dramatically raises interest rates for a very short period of time in order to entice people to keep their coins on deposit or to attract more outside coins into the central bank. Now, the consequence of that is that those coins are no longer going to hit the crypto exchanges and are no longer going to be offered for sale. Thus, your price pressure is alleviated. So in very simple terms, the central bank essentially pays people not to sell their coins. And the critical thing is that it does it at the right time, in the right amount, and without, in the long run, printing too much money. Now, just to briefly show you what that looks like on a chart, So above we have interest rates, and below we have deposit flows. So let's say you have some negative event and people start pulling money from the central bank. It causes a spike in interest rates, as I described. And on the right-hand side, you have the opposite situation where money is flowing into the central bank and it depresses interest rates. Now, just to show you a similar snapshot from our testnet, again, it's the very same situation. We are stress testing our central bank with significant random volatility, which creates small spikes in the interest rate, and a single discrete negative event where 1% of the whole money supply is withdrawn in one go in a very short period of time and causes a massive spike in rates beyond anything you would have ever seen in a fiat context, but for a very short period of time, which in turn disincentivizes people from pulling their money. Now, the way to look at this, perhaps, is that we turn price volatility into interest rate volatility, which is in itself significantly less harmful for the economy. Now, finally, let me just say a couple of words about what we're trying to do in general. We are trying to build a protocol which ultimately can become a basis for fully self-sovereign money. Now, again, that means we are not going to use external information, so currency pegs are out. We do not want to use external assets, so collateral is out. Hopefully, we can avoid a governance layer because it carries with itself a lot of separate baggage. And finally, we're trying to build a protocol which is equitable in that owning a large chunk of the money supply does not confer on you any extraordinary economic advantages. So basically, this is us. Thank you very much. I'll take your questions if you have any. There is, oh yeah, right.
I used to work on the Wall Street for several years, and every time I see that there are attempts to somehow, show technology or show a mechanism for, I don't want to use the word begging, but something that you do when there's a known technology, known algorithm, what happens in the certain situations. There are going to be people who would try to use it for their arbitrage opportunities, and meaning that as long as you have more money than they do, you're good. But as soon as they just start attacking you over and over again, trying to arbitrage those spikes, what are you going to do then? What is your idea when you don't have just a natural forces working against you? What have the market participants who deliberately attack you and trying to exploit your known system? Thank you.
Absolutely. It's just keep it for the moment. I think you'll need to pass it on. It's a reasonable question. The question of attacks on this protocol from an economic perspective is a topic which can take a lot to explain. I will try and squeeze it into a short period of time. Basically, the protocol can fail in two ways. It can fail either to stabilize, or it can print too much money in the long run. Now, these are your essential attacks. The first point in terms of failing to stabilize can only occur if people cannot interact with the central bank, which is a question of the fundamental blockchain protocol rather than in our economic model. So if we choose the right protocol, that scenario is basically out. Now there's the question of printing too much money, which is, by the way, the only consequence of the attack that you're describing. Now, that is completely within the purview of the central bank. But let's look at it this way. When somebody attacks this protocol, and anybody can do that, no matter how much money you have, you can unilaterally provoke a higher interest rate. Obviously, if you have a huge chunk, the interest rate will shoot up. Now, what happens then is, first of all, everybody who is keeping deposits with the central bank is going to benefit from your attack. So they're going to earn the same rate as you. Moreover, there's a feature in this mechanism which says that as soon as your money starts affecting the interest rate, you cease to benefit from that increase. So essentially, when your deposit that you have withdrawn enters a zone where it starts pushing interest rates up, it keeps on earning the last interest rate that it saw before it entered that period of time. So essentially, there are a number of features, and I'm truly running out of time, which work to ensure that these attacks are absolutely not profitable on a personal level. And in terms of simply aiming to destroy the system, it is hugely, hugely expensive, beyond what it takes to do a 51% attack on a classic proof-of-work protocol.
Sure. Thank you.
One more, if anybody. No? I think we're good.
Any more questions?
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dmitri Senchenko. That was existing stablecoin models on a spectrum of decentralization and self-sufficiency. Give it up for Dmitri.